Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. About a year and a half ago, I read about a new book by a prominent Boston lawyer who was educated at Princeton and Harvard, and he wrote this. He said, quote, "The average professional in this country wakes up in the morning, goes to work, comes home, eats dinner, and then goes to sleep unaware that he or she has likely committed several federal crimes that day. Why? The answer lies in the very nature of modern federal criminal laws, which have exploded in number, but also have become impossibly broad and vague," unquote. And while that quote pertains to federal criminal laws, it really applies all over the scope of federal regulation. They have exploded in number to such an extent that the staff has provided us with an article from the Competitive Enterprise Institute entitled 10,000 Commandments. And they estimate in this article that the annual cost, the yearly cost of federal regulatory activity is costing our economy as much as $2 trillion a year. And what I've noticed over the years is that the more heavily regulated any industry becomes, it ends up in the hands of a few big giants. And I know the Congress several years ago passed the Dodd-Frank law. Before we passed that law, the 5 largest banks had 22% of total deposits in this country. Now they got 45%. And there have been hundreds of small banks and credit unions that have been either gone out of business or been forced to merge or have been bought out. And so we passed a law aiming at the big giants, but we hurt the little guys. And it seems that applies in almost every industry. Ms. Harmon, have you noticed that same trend?
Absolutely. I've seen it my whole career, including before I was at NFIB. We represented at my food and drug law firm a small business owner, actually a couple that were targeted by the DEA. And it was through that process, at the time they were trying to get the meth lab issue, which is an important one. But you saw through the regulations, through all of that, a more consolidated part of that industry. Later, you saw it in grocery stores when it came to WIC programs. And I've seen it, and you can really see it in so many industries. And Dodd-Frank is a perfect example. It was the community banks that were getting closed, not the big ones. And so there's a reason for this. The small business owner is the one doing the regulatory compliance. They do not have legions of attorneys to scour the regulations, the Federal Register, much less the guidance documents we're here talking about today.
When the FDA was small and far less bureaucratic than today, many years ago, we had very many small companies in the drug business. Now the drug business is in the hands of a few big giants. Mr. Noy, I saw you shaking your head up and down. Have you seen this in your industry?
Sir, I think it's an across-the-board issue, and you've even heard some of the leaders of the largest banks talking about how Dodd-Frank created a moat to help them keep competitors out. So there can be a very unfortunate effect where larger entities can try to use regulations as a barrier to entry to create a competitive advantage vis-a-vis smaller entities. I think that's true across the board.
I notice also in some of the material we've been provided that fewer than 200, the committee requested information on more than 12,000 guidance documents. Fewer than 200 guidance documents were submitted to the Government Accountability Office as required by the Congressional Review Act. Mr. McGowan, do you think it's accurate to say that the Congressional Review Act is being ignored by most of the agencies?
If you can hit your mic.
Sorry. Based on our recent work, we found that non-compliance with CRA does exist for the periods that we reviewed, so during the transition periods as well as non-transition periods. So what it means is that the most common deficiency that we found includes that the provision for agencies to provide Congress with adequate time to review regulations.
Well, I can tell you, I was a lawyer and a judge before I came to Congress, and yet there's so many laws and rules and regulations on the books in this country today, I don't think they've even designed a computer that can keep up with all of them, much less a human being. And as this article this book I quoted from, I think it's accurate to say that almost everybody in this room has violated several federal laws, rules, and regulations. They didn't mean to, they didn't know they were, but with this explosion of real laws, rules, and regulations, it's happening all across this country today. It's a very sad thing. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from